Lena was relocating to a new city after being promoted to a managerial position, a milestone she had worked hard to achieve. She was thrilled about the opportunity, but there was one challenge. Her new workplace was 2 hours away from her current home. Rather than enduring a long daily commute, she decided to find a place closer to work. This would be her first time living alone, away from her family, which filled her with both excitement and a touch of nervousness. After searching for a while, she came across an old house on the outskirts of the city. The property was being offered at a great price, mainly due to its age and remote location. Lena, a lifelong fantasy story buff, couldn't help but feel drawn to the house. Its rustic charm, wooden floors, and ivy-covered walls reminded her of the magical worlds she had read about in her favorite books. Living here felt like stepping into one of those stories, a dream she had never realized she wanted until now. With that thought in mind, she made her decision. This house would be her new home. The journey was only 2 hours, but with all the excitement bubbling inside her, it felt like an endless road stretching ahead. She tried to distract herself by listening to an audiobook, then switched to music, but neither could calm her restless energy. Eventually, she decided to listen to her favorite podcast, Terror Talk, a gripping series exploring fascinating and chilling facts about the world's most mysterious and eerie topics. As the familiar voice filled her ears, she finally began to settle into the ride, letting the voice pull her into the dark and fascinating world. Today's topic is the Troxler Effect, the narrator said. If you stare into a mirror for about 10 minutes, you may begin to experience visual distortions and illusions. This phenomenon, known as the Troxler Effect, occurs when your brain starts filling in gaps in your vision, creating strange faces or eerie images. In low light, your reflection might even appear warped or monstrous. This happens because your brain, accustomed to an unchanging image, starts to interpret it differently, almost as if it's trying to make sense of the stillness. Lena had never been afraid of mirrors. To her, they were just glass, simple reflections, nothing more. So she found this both amusing and fascinating. Could she really sit still for 10 whole minutes? The thought alone made her chuckle. If she ever tried to test the Troxler Effect, she knew she wouldn't last. Instead of staying still, she'd probably end up making silly faces, striking dramatic poses, or breaking into an impromptu dance routine. Stillness had never been her thing. If she had a spirit animal, it would undoubtedly be a bubbly golden retriever, full of energy, always moving, and never one to sit quietly for too long. The idea of staying frozen in front of a mirror? Practically impossible. Her train of thought came to an abrupt halt as the voice from her GPS announced, "You have reached your destination." She blinked, snapping back to reality just as she pulled up in front of the house at the end of the road. Stepping out of the car, she took in her surroundings. The house was old, much bigger than her city apartment, and stood quietly among overgrown bushes and towering trees. Its weathered exterior hinted at years of stories hidden within its walls. In the distance, beyond the tangled branches, she caught a glimpse of a dimly lit window from a neighboring house she had passed moments ago. Looking at the overgrown bushes, she sighed, realizing she had her work cut out for her if she wanted to make this place feel like home. She muttered a curse under her breath, realizing the realtor had conveniently left out the ugly parts during their video call. She stepped inside the house, and to her surprise, the interior was nothing like the shabby exterior. It was cozy, with antique furnishings that gave it a unique charm and character. Warm wooden floors, vintage light fixtures, and a fireplace in the corner made it feel unexpectedly inviting. She smiled, realizing she might have been too quick to judge. "Okay, Maybe I take back what I said about the realtor, she thought. Feeling a surge of excitement, she did a little happy dance before setting off to explore the rest of the house. The ground floor was spacious, featuring a cozy hall, a well-sized kitchen, and a bedroom with an attached bath. It felt just right, comfortable and livable. Curious, she made her way up the staircase to the first floor, only to find the doors locked. She already knew this was part of the deal. The homeowner had personal belongings stored upstairs, making those rooms inaccessible. It was a condition of her rental agreement that only the ground floor was available to her, which explained the surprisingly affordable rent. She lingered for a moment, staring at the locked doors before shrugging it off. The ground floor was more than enough for her new beginning. After dinner, she settled into her bedroom with a book in hand, letting its pages pull her into another world. The quiet of the house, paired with the soft glow of her bedside lamp, made the atmosphere feel almost dreamlike. As her eyes grew heavier, the words on the page blurred, and before she knew it, sleep gently overtook her. The next day, Lena kept herself busy around the house, cleaning, taking a stroll around the quiet neighborhood, and cooking while listening to her favorite music. The day passed by smoothly, but she still had 2 more days to go before starting her new job. The house was calmer than she had expected, almost too calm for her liking. She had done everything she could think of, yet the evening stretched before her, empty and uneventful. Hoping for some company, she decided to call her best friend Mia to give her a virtual tour of the house. But after several rings, the call went unanswered. With a sigh, she tossed her phone onto the bed and leaned back against the pillows. Now, she sat there, staring at the ceiling, wondering what to do next. A crazy thought crept into her mind. What if I checked the first floor rooms? She immediately shook her head. No, bad idea. She had agreed to the terms of her rental, and snooping wasn't written anywhere on the paper. But now that the thought had taken root, she couldn't shake it off. The more she tried to ignore it, the stronger it pulled at her curiosity. They're locked anyway, she reasoned. What's the harm in just checking? Maybe if she confirmed for herself that the doors were indeed locked, the thought would finally leave her alone. Before she could second-guess herself, she sprang up from the bed, determined to put her curiosity to rest once and for all. She crept up the stairs, each step deliberate and cautious, as if she were an intruder in her own home. It was ridiculous, she knew. There was no one to wake. Still, the silence pressed in around her, amplifying even the faintest creak of the old wooden steps. She let out a soft, breathless chuckle at her own paranoia. Her mind began to race, conjuring all sorts of possibilities about what lay behind that mysterious door. Was it a forgotten storage room filled with priceless antiques? Or something far more sinister? Maybe the owner had locked away a terrible secret, a body hidden away for years. Or perhaps the room was utterly empty, nothing but dust and shadows. Lost in thought, she reached the topmost step and found herself staring down a dimly lit hallway. 3 closed doors. Identical. Silent. Waiting. She flicked on the light, its glow doing little to soften the eerie stillness. Her breath hitched slightly. Steeling herself, she approached the first door and turned the knob. Locked. No surprise. She exhaled and moved to the second, gripping the handle with more confidence. Also locked. With a quick pivot, she reached for the third door and twisted the knob. It didn't budge. Of course. Determination settled over her like a fever. She had to open that door. If she didn't, the gnawing curiosity would never let her sleep. But how? She racked her brain, recalling scenes from old movies, a bobby pin, or a credit card. That's what they used to pick locks, right? Without hesitation, She turned and bolted down the stairs. Digging into her purse, she yanked out a credit card, then frantically rummaged through her bag for a bobby pin. Her fingers brushed against one, and she snatched it up. Armed with her makeshift tools, she raced back up the stairs, taking them two at a time. The locked doors loomed ahead, waiting. She quickly pulled out her phone and searched for a tutorial on lockpicking. With a deep breath, she glanced at the 3 identical doors and did a quick eeny, meeny, miny, mo, landing on the middle one. That was it. Kneeling before the door, she inserted the bobby pin first, wiggling it around like she'd seen in the video. Nothing. She tried the credit card next, sliding it along the latch. Still nothing. Frustration bubbled up inside her as she jammed both tools in at once, hoping for some miracle. Click. Her heart leapt, but it was just the bobby pin snapping in half, wedging itself into the knob. Not as easy as shown in the movies, was it? She let out a frustrated groan, clenched her fists, and before she could stop herself, she kicked the door. The impact echoed through the hallway, and then to her shock, the door creaked open. Unbelievable. She was certain she had broken the lock. Hesitantly, she peeked inside. Nothing unusual. Just a bedroom. Her eyes swept over the room. Everything was perfectly in place, almost too perfect. A large bed stood in the center, its elegant drapes neatly tied to the wooden posts. A small nightstand sat beside it, holding an old-fashioned lamp. She reached out and switched it on. The dim glow bathed the room in a soft golden light, making the space feel strangely inviting. Then, her gaze landed on a cupboard on the far side of the room. She stepped forward, gripped the handle, and pulled it open. Inside was more than a simple cupboard. It was a walk-in closet, and it was completely empty. She frowned. The rest of the house had been old and cluttered, but this felt deliberately bare. Then she noticed it. Across the room, mounted on the wall, was a full-length mirror. It stood perfectly clean, reflecting the soft glow of the lamp. She stepped inside to take a close look at the mirror. The mirror was tall and grand, almost touching the ceiling. Its frame was made of dark-colored wood, carved with twisting, curling shapes that wrapped around the edges. The design was so detailed and complex that it almost seemed to move if she stared too long, like Medusa's hair, wild and alive. She stepped in front of the mirror, a mischievous grin creeping onto her face. In a slow, eerie voice, she whispered, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The words hung in the air for a moment before she burst into laughter, the sound echoing softly through the empty room. She began to admire her reflection, tilting her head slightly, shifting her posture. The soft glow of the lamp cast gentle shadows on her face, highlighting her features in an almost dreamlike way. Her skin looked smooth, her eyes deeper. Her beauty. Too perfect. That's when she remembered it. The Troxler Effect. A psychological trick of the mind where staring at a reflection for too long in dim light could make the brain distort the image. Features could blur, shift, or even disappear entirely. Some people claim to see their faces morph into something unrecognizable. A shiver of excitement ran through her. She had the perfect setup, a large antique mirror, a dimly lit room, and plenty of time to kill. Smirking to herself, she decided to test the theory. She sat cross-legged in front of the mirror, her eyes locking onto her own reflection. At first, she tried to focus, but within seconds, her mind wandered. Bored, she blew a raspberry at herself. The ridiculousness of it made her laugh. How do people even do this? Staying still for a minute felt impossible. 10 minutes? Forget it. She shook her head, amused. But still, she wasn't ready to give up just yet. Taking a deep breath, she stilled herself once more. This time, she was determined to see it through. After a few minutes, her mind drifted again. This felt so stupid. She smirked to herself. I should have asked. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the stupidest of them all? That thought sent her into a fit of laughter. She was mid-laugh when her breath suddenly caught in her throat. Her reflection wasn't laughing. It just stared back at her, motionless. Her heart stopped. Every inch of her body went numb. With a sudden jolt of panic, she sprung to her feet. The reflection followed. She clenched her fists, her pulse pounding in her ears. The reflection did the same. Everything was back to normal. She swallowed hard, pressing a shaky hand to her forehead. Did that just happen? Did I imagine it? Muttering a curse under her breath, she forced herself to look back at the mirror. It was just a mirror. Still, ordinary, staring back at her. A chill ran through her, and suddenly, she wanted nothing more than to get out of that room. She turned on her heel and bolted. Rushing into her bedroom, she slammed the door shut, locking it behind her. Without a second thought, she dove into bed, yanking the covers over her head, her heart still hammered in her chest. Lena's thoughts raced 1,000 miles per hour, a whirlwind of panic and doubt. A deep, uneasy feeling settled in her chest, making it hard to breathe. This Troxler Effect will be the death of me, she thought, clenching the sheets. But was it really just an illusion? Or was there something more? Was it the mirror? The godforsaken old house? Or was her own mind turning against her? She couldn't shake the feeling. She couldn't relax. Her body was exhausted, but her mind wouldn't stop spiraling. She lay there, eyes darting around the room, gripping the blankets tight. She spent hours lying in bed, her mind spiraling deeper into the very hole she had dug for herself, the one she thought would be fun. No matter how tightly she shut her eyes, she couldn't silence the nagging thoughts. Was it all in her head? Or had she stared too long into something she was never meant to see? At some point, without realizing it, she drifted into a restless sleep. The next morning, Lena woke up with a sudden jolt, her body shuddering as if shaken from a bad dream. Morning light streamed through the windows, bathing the room in warmth. Blinking against the brightness, she lay still as the events of last night slowly crept back into her mind. She couldn't believe she had actually fallen asleep amidst all that chaos. Sitting up in bed, she let out a slow breath. This time, her thoughts didn't spiral. She felt calmer, more grounded. After a night's sleep, it all seemed so irrational. It was just the Troxler Effect, she reasoned. Nothing more. The perfect mix of a dimly lit room, an old mirror, and an overactive imagination had fueled her fear. That's all it was. A trick of the mind. She sat on the bed for a few more minutes, her mind blank. No racing thoughts, no fear, just emptiness. But she knew she couldn't sit there all day, dwelling on last night. She needed to do something, anything, to shake this off. With a deep breath, she sprang out of bed and headed to the bathroom to freshen up. As soon as she stepped inside, her eyes landed on the mirror above the sink. For fuck's sake, she muttered. She took a moment and reassured herself that it's just a mirror. She grabbed her toothbrush, squeezed out the toothpaste, and stared straight into the reflection. Face it head on, she told herself. Win this fear. Brushing slowly, she kept her gaze locked on the glass. Nothing happened. No flickers, no distortions, just her own tired face staring back. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. Just fucking me looking at me. Satisfied, she bent over the sink to spit. And then, for a split second, she realized her reflection didn't bend along with her. Her body turned ice cold. She sprang upright, her breath caught in her throat. Eyes wide with terror, she snapped her gaze to the mirror. Her reflection stood there, but it wasn't right. One hand held the toothbrush, but the other arm was folded just below her chest, a posture she hadn't taken. And her head. It was tilted a bit to the left side. And the worst part? That smile. Wicked. Evil. Knowing. As if the thing in the mirror was mocking her. Lena's body went cold. A scream died in her throat. She bolted, racing out of the bathroom. She grabbed her keys and phone with trembling hands, not daring to look back. She needed to get out. She slammed the door behind her and ran to her car, fumbling with the keys as her pulse pounded in her ears. Sliding into the driver's seat, she jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. She didn't think. She didn't look. She just drove. Her hands gripped the wheel too tight, her breaths coming in quick, shallow gasps. She had no idea where she was going. She just knew she had to get away. She drove like a maniac, the tires screeching as she sped down the empty road. Her hands trembled on the wheel, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst through her chest. For minutes, she didn't think, just drove. Finally, her breath started to slow. The panic that had gripped her chest loosened just enough for her to realize she was far away now. Far from that house. With a shaky exhale, she eased her foot off the gas and brought the car to a stop on the side of the road. The silence was deafening. She let her forehead rest against the steering wheel, trying to gather her thoughts. But no matter how hard she tried, one thing wouldn't leave her mind. That thing in the mirror. That wasn't her, and it sure as hell wasn't the Troxler Effect. Lena sat there, gripping the steering wheel, her breath still unsteady. She made a decision right then and there. She was never stepping foot in that house again. Not ever. She wanted out. Out of this town. Out of this nightmare. The job, the so-called dream house. None of it mattered anymore. She just wanted to go home. But first, she needed to calm down. She remembered a small restaurant nearby, a place she had passed on the drive here. Somewhere with people. Somewhere normal. She started the car again and drove there, forcing herself to focus on the road, on the mundane act of driving. Anything to push the memory of that twisted reflection out of her head. She thought that she would sit down, have some coffee, and breathe. Then, she would get back on the highway and drive straight to the city, back to her real home, back to where it felt safe. However, throughout the drive, she couldn't gather the courage to look at the rearview mirror. She just stared at the road. Lena pulled up to the restaurant. She is still trembling. She just needed to sit down, have some coffee, breathe. She stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming softly. The scent of fresh coffee and fried food filled the air, and the quiet hum of conversation made her feel a little more grounded. She walked up to the counter and took a seat, but the moment she lifted her gaze, her stomach dropped. Behind the counter, spanning the entire wall, was a mirror. A huge one. It was there to reflect the light, making the small diner feel bigger, brighter. But to Lena, it felt like a trap. She swallowed hard, her hands clenching into fists on her lap. There were people around. She wasn't alone. Nothing would happen. She kept her head down, refusing to look. A waitress approached with a kind smile. "What can I get you, hun?" "Just coffee," Lena mumbled, her voice barely above a whisper. The waitress nodded and walked away, leaving Lena in uneasy silence. She didn't want to look at the mirror. She shouldn't look. But something inside her, some desperate need for reassurance, begged her to do it. It was just that damn house. I'm far away now. I'm safe. Slowly, hesitantly, she lifted her eyes to the mirror, and the blood in her veins turned to ice. The reflection staring back at her looked exactly the same. Same messy hair, same tired eyes, same pale face. But then, that damn smile, that wicked, twisted, knowing smile. Her stomach dropped. No. She was miles away from that house. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. Her fingers dug into her thighs, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The restaurant was full of people, customers chatting, the waitress pouring coffee, forks clinking against plates. Everything was normal. Everything except that thing in the mirror. It was still smiling. Too wide, stretching beyond what was natural. Lena bolted out of the restaurant. She didn't stop, didn't think, didn't look back. She threw herself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and turned the key with shaking hands. The engine roared to life, and she sped off, her vision tunneling as the world blurred past her. Her mind was blank, but her body trembled violently. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She felt sick. A deep, twisting nausea churned in her stomach, like she was dying. She drove and drove. She had no memory of the roads she took, no sense of time passing. But suddenly, she was there, at her home. She rushed to the door and knocked, hard. No one answered. She reached under the flower pot and found the spare key. This was home. This was safe. She opened the door, stepped inside, and ran to her room, throwing herself onto the bed. She called Mia and asked her to meet at her house immediately without diving into any details. She buried her face into the pillow, clutching it tightly as if it could muffle the fear creeping through her. Mia would be here soon. Mia would fix this. The thought of her friend brought a sliver of comfort, steadying her frantic heartbeat. She exhaled deeply, lifting her head, and froze. Something moved in her peripheral vision. Lena turned her head slowly, dread pooling in her stomach. Her reflection was staring back at her from the dressing mirror. But it wasn't just staring, it was smiling. That unnatural, twisted grin that sent a chill racing down her spine. Lena's breath hitched. Then, in a burst of terror-fueled rage, she sprang from the bed, stormed up to the mirror, and screamed, "What do you want?" The reflection didn't answer. It simply lifted one hand, moving with eerie slowness, and pointed at Lena, like it wanted her. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the reflection vanished. Lena stumbled back, her pulse hammering in her ears. What the hell was happening? And then, she felt it, a presence, behind her. Her body went rigid, cold terror gripping her throat. She didn't need to turn around. She could already see it, in the mirror. Her reflection, standing behind her, closer, moving. Lena turned slowly, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The moment her eyes met its gaze, the reflection's grin widened. Then, with inhuman speed, it lunged. A cold hand clamping around her throat, pushing her backward toward the mirror. Lena's lungs burned. Her hands clawed at the cold, impossible grip around her throat, but it was useless. Her reflection. No, not her reflection, that thing was too strong. The mirror pressed harder against her back, the surface no longer solid, but soft, liquid-like. And then, she fell, tumbling backward into the darkness, into the mirror, into nothingness. Her stomach lurched as her feet hit solid ground. If this place even had a ground. It was pitch black, cold, silent. Her breath shuddered out of her as she turned, hands outstretched, feeling for anything. And then she saw it. the mirror. But now she was on the other side. She saw her bedroom, saw her dresser, saw herself standing on the other side. No, not her. The thing that had taken her place. It looked at her, its smile stretching wider, unnatural, impossible. Lena pounded on the glass. No, let me out. Her reflection didn't answer. It only watched, its head tilting in that mocking way. And then, Mia's voice. Lena. Lena froze. Mia was here. Lena screamed, slammed her fists against the glass. Mia, I'm here. Don't trust it. But Mia didn't react. She just stood there, looking at the thing wearing Lena's face. And then, the imposter spoke. Hey, Mia. It sounded just like her. Lena screamed. Mia was concerned. God, you look like hell. Are you okay? The imposter said, No, Mia. Mia stepped forward and hugged the imposter and said, Oh, you poor thing. The imposter wrapped its arms around Mia, holding her in a disturbingly familiar embrace. Over Mia's shoulder, it locked eyes with Lena, trapped inside the mirror. And then, it grinned. A slow, wicked stretch of lips that sent ice through Lena's veins. She screamed, slamming her fists against the cold, unyielding glass.